A second chance at forever. The aroma of roasted coffee beans mingled with the hum of casual chatter as Daniel Grant stepped into the upscale coffee shop. It was the kind of place that catered to his usual clientele, professionals and dreamers tapping away on laptops or deep in animated conversation. For Daniel, it was a brief respite from the chaos of his world, a world defined by power lunches, conference calls, and the relentless pursuit of success. His mind was preoccupied as usual, juggling investment portfolios and boardroom strategies, leaving little room for the mundane. Dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit that hugged his broad shoulders, Daniel was every bit the picture of a self-made millionaire. His shoes gleamed, his silver tie was perfectly knotted, and his presence commanded attention. Yet, as he approached the counter to order his usual, his gaze was inexplicably drawn to the far corner of the room. There she was, Isabella. Time seemed to slow as Daniel's eyes locked onto her. For a moment, he thought he was imagining things. His ex-wife, the woman he had once promised forever to, was sitting near the window, bathed in the golden afternoon light. She was smiling down at the baby in her arms, her eyes filled with a tenderness that Daniel hadn't seen in years. His heart pounded. A whirlwind of emotions crashed over him: shock, confusion, and something deeper, something he had buried long ago. The barista handed him his espresso, but Daniel barely registered it. His legs moved on their own as he made his way toward Isabella's table. She hadn't noticed him yet, too engrossed in the tiny life cradled in her arms. The baby's small hand curled around her finger, his soft breaths barely audible over the background noise of the calf. Daniel's breath hitched. The baby had his eyes. A chilling realization gripped him. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the infant. The soft tufts of dark hair, the delicate features, everything about the child sent a jolt of recognition through him. No, it couldn't be, could it? The moment of truth. Daniel cleared his throat. Isabella's head snapped up, her brown eyes widening in shock as she met his gaze. A flood of emotions flickered across her face: surprise, panic, and something else he couldn't quite place. Daniel, she breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. His name on her lips sent a shiver down his spine. It had been years since he had last heard her say it, years since their marriage had crumbled under the weight of his ambition, leaving behind only bitter memories and unanswered questions. But now there was a baby. Isabella, he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. His eyes flickered down to the infant. Who? She looked away, biting her lip. Daniel's world tilted. Is he? His voice cracked, unable to finish the question. Isabella let out a shaky breath. She knew she couldn't run from this moment. His name is Leo, she said softly, adjusting the baby in her arms. He's your son. The words hit him like a sledgehammer. Daniel's knees nearly gave out. His son. He had a son. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was raw, laced with betrayal and hurt. Tears welled in Isabella's eyes. Because, Daniel, you had already made your choice. His stomach twisted. He had been so consumed by his career, so determined to build an empire, that he had let their marriage fall apart. She had tried to reach him back then, but he had been too blinded by ambition to see what he was losing. I wanted to tell you, Isabella continued, her voice thick with emotion, but every time I picked up the phone, I thought about how we ended things. You were so unreachable. I convinced myself it was better this way. Daniel's hands curled into fists. Better for who? Isabella, I missed. He hesitated, swallowing hard. I missed everything. Leo stirred in her arms, as if sensing the tension in the air. Instinctively, Daniel reached out, his fingers brushing against the baby's tiny hand. A jolt of emotion surged through him. He had spent years closing himself off from love, from attachment. But in that moment, staring down at the child who shared his blood, something cracked inside him. Regret, pain, hope. I don't know what to say, Daniel admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't even know where to start. Isabella studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed. Then start here, she said, her voice gentle. Sit down, Daniel. A new beginning. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't have a plan. No calculated strategy, no carefully rehearsed words, just raw, unfiltered emotion. He pulled out a chair and sat across from Isabella and their son, and as he looked into Leo's bright, curious eyes, Daniel knew this was the most important deal of his life, one he couldn't afford to lose. A future rewritten. Daniel sat in silence, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. He had built his entire life around controlling deals, negotiations, even emotions, but this was something he had no blueprint for. His eyes remained fixed on Leo, who was now staring back at him with wide, curious eyes. A small, gurgling sound escaped the baby's lips, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt something foreign yet familiar warmth. He looked up at Isabella, searching her face for any sign of hesitation. Instead, he found quiet resolve. She had done this alone, without him. "How did you manage all this time?" he finally asked, his voice softer now. Isabella smiled, though there was sadness behind it. "It wasn't easy, but I had to be strong for him." She hesitated, then added, "For myself too." Daniel exhaled slowly, rubbing a hand over his face. "I wish I had known, but would it have changed anything?" she asked gently. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to believe that knowing about Leo earlier would have made him a different man. But deep down, he knew the truth. Back then, he had been too consumed by success, too caught up in the chase to appreciate what truly mattered. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I do know one thing: I don't want to miss another moment." A flicker of surprise crossed Isabella's face. "What are you saying?" Daniel sat up straighter, determination settling in his chest. "I want to be in his life. In your life, if you'll let me." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the rhythmic hum of the coffee shop. Finally, Isabella spoke. "Daniel, I'm not the same woman you walked away from. I won't just let you waltz back in and expect things to go back to how they were." He nodded. "I wouldn't expect that. But I'm willing to prove myself to earn my place. Not just as Leo's father, but as someone you can trust again." She studied him for a long time. Then, with a deep breath, she said, "Then we start slow." Daniel smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile. "Slow works for me." Leo let out a tiny yawn, stretching his arms before settling against Isabella's chest. The sight made Daniel's heart clench. He had missed the beginning of his son's life, but he wouldn't miss the rest. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, casting a golden glow over them, Daniel realized something profound: wealth, power, and success meant nothing if you had no one to share it with. And for the first time in a long time, he felt truly rich. Moral of the story: priorities shape our lives. Success and ambition are important, but not at the cost of the people who truly matter. Daniel's story is a reminder that no amount of wealth can replace the love of family and the time we invest in them. It's never too late to make things right, but you have to be willing to put in the effort.